Do you just want to remind us again about how your father came to Bennington College?
Oh yes, yes, yes. Oh, my father came to Bennington College by a series of fortunate coincidences. It was during the war. We lived in England. We had come from Vienna, my father first, and I came in 1934, my mother later. But during the war, we were classified as enemy aliens. Right? So fortunately, we obtained British naturalization early in 1940. And that saved my father from being interned. He was at that about 50, in his early 50s. And he decided to undertake a third lecture tour in the United States, organized by the International Institute of Education. So he came, and he came to New York. Now, Peter Drucker was an acquaintance from Vienna. When Drucker passed through England, I think they met there again, or they met in New York, I'm not sure. But in any event, Drucker had been passing names of continental intellectuals displaced to the president of Bennington, President Lee. And so when my father was passing here through New York, basically in order to organize another lecture tour, he came to the attention of President Lee. He was invited to give 5 lectures on the subject of our present age of transformation. And after he gave these late in 1940, President Lee then obtained from the Rockefeller Foundation funds to invite Polanyi to stay and to write a book, which apparently my father said was the most important thing in his life to do. It's very clear now, years later, reading these lectures, that all the main ideas of the book, The Great Transformation, were in his mind. And the time and the circle, the way that he could live here and teach here enabled him to write the book. In the next year, 1941, Ilona, his wife, my mother, came to join him. And she was teaching also at the college, mathematics and I think mechanics or physics. And I think they were very happy here. Now, the book was not quite finished when it was clear that the Allied side was winning the war. Basically, Stalingrad and the Russian armies had turned back many divisions of the German armies. I still remember, I was in England at that time, and I remember those long lines of German generals in long coats being taken prisoner on the Russian front. So they decided to return to England in 1943. And where my father was teaching, he was employed by the Workers' Education Association. It's a very well-established adult education institution in England, and so its president was none other than Richard Tawney. And the problem, my father's problem was really not his problem, but it was a reality that because he never had a university degree in history or anthropology or political science or anything else other than law, he could not get the lowest job in any English university. And really by now, after the publication of the book, after its reception, very favorable reception in the United States, totally ignored in its English version. Interestingly, I think I mentioned that the same thing happened to Hayek and his Road to Serfdom. That was quite ignored in England. It didn't seem to make sense to think that the English Labour Party was taking the country to serfdom. But when the thing was reproduced by the Reader's Digest in the United States, it received a lot of attention and basically made Hayek well known and ultimately installed in Chicago. But now in 1947, to go back to on track, my father received an invitation from Columbia University for a visiting professorship in the Department of Economics. And that was on the basis of the Great Transformation that had been so well received, not well received everywhere, but Columbia University has a tradition of institutional approaches to the social sciences. And there was no question but he had to accept. It would have been impossible to refuse such a possibility of further research and work. The problem was that my mother was not permitted to join him.
Why was she not permitted?
My mother was excluded from entry to the United States in 1947 on account of her communist activities in Hungary in 1919 and in Austria in 1930s. Well, this was a family crisis, really. But it was solved by my mother agreed to establish a home in Canada on the outskirts of Toronto. And that's from where Kari could commute to New York.
Could you describe a little what it's been like for you to come to Bennington, to see where your father wrote the book, and to have this conversation about how relevant and powerful the book has been to so many people who are here, so many distinguished scholars, and being at Bennington?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I find it difficult to put into words, and really just so I feel honored to be here. and it is my first visit here. Many people think they ask me, were you here when your parents were here? Do you know this place? I said, no, I have never been here in my life before. When my parents were here, they did ask if I would like to come over, but I didn't wish to leave England. I had a life to live there. And I am so impressed with what you have achieved here with this conference. Really, it is so well organized. You have invited really so many of the people that must be invited. I can't think of anybody that is excluded. It is unfortunate, that your budgetary limitations made it so difficult to invite more Europeans, more people from abroad. And I'm very, very happy that you were able to invite particularly my colleagues from the recently established International Polanyi Society, headquartered in Vienna.
Yes.
And I hope you'll be able to maintain some kind of contact.
We've already started talking
with them.
about
Yes, that would be good.
Kari, we didn't get much of a chance this weekend to talk about your mother. And yet she taught here as well, and if I'm not mistaken, didn't she go to RPI and learn how to fly planes?
She did. You're quite right. That is absolutely true. However, this story was quite embroidered. I mean, beyond the fact that she got a certificate to fly a civilian plane, I understood from some people here that the story was that she had flown to, I don't know where, to France or somewhere.
Or flown for the resistance.
Oh.
That's what I had.
Flown for the resistance, yes. You know, I'm sure that would have been her dream to do that. But that didn't quite square with being in Bennington, Vermont. Flying to the resistance in a little civilian plane. But no, you know, my mother always, she had this desire to fly. And she had started taking some lessons when the war broke out. But of course, as soon as, that was in September 1939, and after that you could no longer go to civilian flying school in England. It's now the war.
Yes.
So when she came here, she had the opportunity of a civilian flying school, and she would renew that certificate every year. She also belonged to some pilots association or some kind of an association that she valued very much, that she renewed for many years. In England, she had a little motorcycle. It had the what you call it? The sign you put on a car,
License
the
plate?
license plate. The license plates, it spelled ELF, elf. The motorcycle was really a cross between a motorcycle and a bicycle. It was a very fragile, small, not a real motorcycle, but it was one made for ladies. And she used to ride that up and down the narrow country lanes with their hedges and their right turns and left turns and block views. And we were so frightened for her. And when she came to Canada, she wanted to bring the elf, and my father said no. No. And I agreed, said no way. Other than that, whatever she wanted, he adored, his wife. And whatever she wished to do, that was all right with him, but not that elf, not that motorcycle.
I wanted to just tell you briefly, David and I have been looking for students who were here when your parents were here.
Oh, yes?
And we did meet one woman who was class of 1944, and she took math with your mom.
Yes?
Yes.
She didn't,
Really?
She didn't recall a lot of details, but she said she wasn't a very good student, but she said your mom was very nice, and she really appreciated the class.
Well, isn't that
She
nice?
remembered it. Yeah.
Yes. She said people sort of knew your father was around, but he was busy writing. But
Yes.
they took a class with your mom.
Ah, interesting. Well, my parents were quite friendly with Doris and Peter Drucker, who lived on
Yes.
campus here
Yes.
one time. Yes.
And when I came, Harry Pearson, who
Oh, my.
was your father's one of his favorite students, right?
He-
was here. He was here when I was here.
Harry Pearson was my father's favorite student. Absolutely, he loved Harry. They really were very, very close. And I think that is why he came here, is it not? After he graduated
Yeah,
from Columbia.
absolutely.
Yes. Yes.
How do you feel your father's work has influenced your work, our outlook on the world now? It just seems like there's so much influence of your father's work and the Great Transformation, but you have your own work that's very important in its own right, and many of the things you've talked about at this conference have been so important and relevant. So I was just curious of what that's been like for you.
interesting. People imagined, that I probably learned very much from my father and was influenced by his work, and would be discussed around the family dinner table or something like that. That never happened. I think I would say that I really became familiar with my father's work only after my mother died, and I inherited the responsibility for the literary legacy. And I then began not only the great transformation, because I now attempted to get as many translations. We now have 20 translations.
Wow.
At the time my mother died, there were only 2. But also all his other works. I became familiar with them, and then I began to join the conversation of others who were really more directly influenced by my father, including Fred Bloch and so forth. So I'm a kind of latecomer to the Polanyi admiration
Conversation.
But I think I was always very close to my father. And I think I must have, how should I say, general attitudes and just a way of thinking. I'm sure that I was influenced in that way, because I was close with both my parents, but not directly. So I would be more, my generation was raised more on Marx, and then of course as an economist on the works of Keynes and so forth. But I had 2 interests when I was in school, and I wanted to gain access to university. The first was physics. That is what I really wanted to do, and I sat exams in Cambridge, and I got accepted into the second year tripass. But that required money, which we didn't have, and I didn't make the scholarship. That competition was too tough. And then I tried history in Oxford, and the same thing happened, acceptance but no scholarship. So then I concluded I was a total academic failure, and I would just go to the London School of Economics and have fun, and with leftist politics, and learn how to put the world right and that kind of thing. So, and the London School of Economics, being part of London University, of course, was affordable, with a grant from my local Kent County Education Authority, which was reasonable and which I was able to repay. Yeah.
I mean, it comes to me, I wonder about generational readings of Marx. It seems your father's generation read Marx in a very particular way, and your generation read Marx in a sort of different kind of way.
Yeah, this is interesting. Not only Marx, but the idea of Marx, right? Now, for my father's generation, Marx and Marxism was standard education. I mean, educated intellectuals. Thanks. Of his time and his generation would be familiar with Marx. I don't know how much they actually had read, but the concept, yeah. Just the way that happens with Keynes now. I mean, you'd hardly meet anybody who really has never heard of or doesn't know the basic ideas of Keynes. Also, Marx was, of course, as I'm sure you know, the intellectual star, if you wish, of all the major social democratic parties of Europe, certainly of Hungary and Germany. So Marx came with social democratic parties, and they believed, and this is interesting because I encountered this as a child, that eventually capitalism would disappear and we would have socialism. And socialism was something wonderful, where everybody gets together and we all live like in one family. So It was, I think, that socialism, which of course never happened, was a kind of a myth. At the same time, those social democratic parties were rather tired. I mean, the time with my father in Hungary before the war, they were parliamentary parties. They were related, I think, closely to the trade unions. And on the whole, they were not very exciting. You know, they're part of the political furniture. Now, in Vienna, that was very different, the so-called Red Vienna. And that I remember as a child.
Really?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I would say that this was the formative years in my life were my first 10 years in Vienna.
Wow.
And they were very happy. I was an only child, and they were happy years. And I have memories I have kept all my life of, you know, they had a children's organization called the Kinderfreunde. And so after school, incidentally, I loved going to school. School was just downstairs where we lived, on the street. And there had been a big school reform that had made the public primary school system of Vienna very modern. And I remember I loved the picture books. I still remember them, you know. I remember that they were glossy and brightly colored, you know, there's A is for apple and B is for Birne and so on. So I benefited from this modern, excellent, bright, you know, elementary school. And then the Kinderfreunde had activities in the afternoon. You could go and build things and make things, and whatever you wanted to do. I liked woodwork a lot. And then there were summer camps at the most beautiful lakes in Salzburg, in Austria, children's camps. And then there were all of the songs that we would sing and so forth. So, and then I belonged to a the children's section of a workers' gym club, Arbeiterturnverein in German. It had a children's section, basically in the gym of a local school. Wow. And you can tumble and do things on the horse and, you know, so all that kind of world, you know, as a child. Actually, I was told later in life, and it was written, that it so impressed my parents, who were not terribly enthusiastic about social democratic parties. They thought it was, you know, rather staid and boring. But that in Vienna it had provided this wonderful environment for their child. I can take some claim in having converted my parents to be enthusiastic supporters of the socialist administration of Vienna. But seriously, of course.
Yeah.
My father actually wrote that socialist Vienna administration was a high point of Western achievement.
Yes,
you know, really,
absolutely.
very remarkable.
Your father's generation reads Marx and sort of goes to social democratic politics. How does your generation read Marx? When you were coming of age in college and university in your own work, you also were reading Marx.
I wasn't reading very much Marx, but when I was in school, I wanted to join the Communist Party. I was too young, but eventually I did. At the London School of Economics, yes, we had a Communist Party, and I must tell you that the brightest and best of the students were all members of that.
Really? And
Communist
was
Party.
that because of a reaction, do you think, to, was already the commodification, like these ideas, were they
That I
already...
tell you that came in the 1930s. I'm talking about England now.
Yeah.
1930s England. There was massive unemployment. There were hopes, and people looked at the Soviet Union as something to be admired because there was no unemployment. But more than that, there was a rise of fascism. There were socialist and communist movements that were opposed. We had heard stories about what was happening on the continent in Germany and so on. And of course, but during the war, the Communist Party, such as they were in England, quite small, but of course they were in support of the war, as the Labour Party also. So Churchill was the Prime Minister, but there was unanimous support for the war effort. And yeah, what do you think?
I wanted to ask you something about what you said on Friday, which was that you talked about the Great Transformation. It couldn't have been written the way it was written in England. It couldn't have been written the way it was written at a university.
I believe that.
Could you say more about that? I mean, it was such an interesting point that I wanted to hear a little bit more about.
Well, I don't know what you mean by in England. He did not have the opportunity of writing a book.
This is what
that is a reality, and Bennington offered him that opportunity. I mean, it was wonderful. Gareth challenged me. He thought that he thought that Polanyi had that book in his mind, and even if he had not come here, that book would have been written. And I said, no way. It was not possible. I mean, there were the kind of environment that was provided by Bennington College that enabled him to write that book over a period and teach of 2 years. Yeah. I mean, no way. No way. Apart from the fact that by the time he came here, we were at war, and he was an enemy alien, and he would have been interned. But even before the war, we simply didn't, because no university, there was no entry for Polanyi in any university. But I think I told you when I was speaking there the other night.
Yes.
Did I relate to you the Rockefeller Committee and how they received this book?
What did they say?
Tell the story again, would be good.
Well, after the first year, there was a matter of renewal of the grant for the second year. They asked to see, and he sent them chapters. And they read that. They did not like what they were reading, and they made it very clear. And they stated that, in their opinion, Dr. Polanyi was not university material. His interests were, this is a real put down, his interests were in Hungarian law, in college teaching and schools, and aspirations to philosophy, aspirations to be a philosopher.
That is one of the strengths.
Absolute put down.
Totally, but what I was going to say is what I feel so honored to have you express to us is that Bennington College was one of the few places that was an academic institution,
Yes.
but totally embraced Polanyi and many other scholars at the time who were doing radically very different
absolutely.
kinds of scholarship, and yeah.
I mean, I must really put it on the record that the United States had a totally different attitude on this issue. And they benefited from having here very many outstanding European intellectuals who had to leave their countries. And Bennington, one of the, but there were also many other colleges and universities, and the way in which the United States responded, you know, and was happy to receive people. The universities, and again, I mean, the invitation to Columbia as a full professor, that could never have happened in England. Never. The other comment I made, that I think that such a book could not come out of any university. That is universal. That has nothing to do with England, America, or any other place. I don't think in the United States either. Certainly not in England, but I don't think in the US either.
Why not?
Because the way the book was written, that book is written with passion, rather dramatically, in its language. This is not the way of university, and you know that. That is not how things are done in university. That explains those people from the Rockefeller Foundation were people that were giving out grants to university projects, university professors. And when they saw that writing and what is behind it, of a rejection of market capitalism, didn't like it.
So proud of Bennington.
Yeah.
Yes, well, I'm just so happy. And and then I am that, you know, you people organized this conference. Quite remarkable.
And you said it's
And wonderful.
the first major conference on Polanyi in the United States
Yes,
is here back at Bennington College.
yes, I think so. We had something in 2015, organized actually by the Rosa Luxemburg Foundation, and it was held at the New School. Nancy Fraser was there, she was the host. But that was different. That was a workshop in which about 5 or 6 people were invited, you know, in order to contribute, to make a book. That is the book which Michael Bree and Klaus Thomas Berger put together, in which I have a chapter. But that was not a conference like this, like that brings together a wide swath of scholars and lovely exchanges that you managed to have. I think it's very good.
Well, it's long overdue welcoming you back.
And we hope to stay in touch with you.
Oh, please do.
Absolutely.
No, I must tell you, I recently discovered, when I mentioned it in my talk, this book by one Quinn Slobodian.
Yeah.
And when I discovered it too late, I decided to write him a letter. John, I sent a copy to John to see, perhaps by some chance, because it's not that far away, you might be able to come over and meet, particularly to meet the European colleagues, because, you know,
what a shame he couldn't come.
and he replied, very nice letter he wrote back. He said, no of his story, but that weekend he was going to Finland to give a talk. But maybe some other time.
Maybe some other time.
But he is somebody that you should
Love to have a
invite.
conversation with.
Yes, yes.
Well, we should get lunch.